Good morning, gardeners. This is Anna, and I'm out on the Unity Church garden. And today is kind of a hot day. This tastes so good. As we think about life in this garden, life around us, there are some things that are required for things to stay alive, like food and water, and for animals, shelter. If you think about that, if you were in an emergency situation, say you were lost in the wilderness somewhere, what do you think is the most important? Food or water? Let's think about that for a second. We can be thankful for both as we light our chalice. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth and the warmth of love. And you can join me in singing right now. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. And as we begin the day, we think about things that we're grateful for, like water, and we share our joys and sorrows. You can do this at home, and you can also do it in the quiet of your heart. We could say we're grateful for the sun and the rain and the water, and we are sad and are thinking about people who are struggling in the world, things like that. So I'm going to give you a second to do this at home. Thank you for that. As we think about water, I had it pretty easy. Where did this come from? I went to a faucet, turned it on, and water came out. And that is a miracle. That hasn't always been the case. Used to be people had to live near a river or a lake, and they had to go down and they had to haul it up, or they had to pump it out of the ground with a water pump. And there are many places in the world where people still have to do that. And sometimes they walk great distances. It's often the girls in the family who carry the water jugs down to the river and carry it back, and it can be a dangerous walk. They can be attacked, all sorts of stuff can happen. And even after they get the water, sometimes the water is dirty. It may have disease organisms in it. It may have pollution in it from all sorts of things. So we're very lucky that we can just turn on a faucet and get water. And so I've been thinking, where does that water come from that comes out of my faucet? And today I am in a place where the sky's a little cloudy. We know that rain comes out of those clouds, but how does the rain get up there in the clouds? Well, I've got a little experiment to show you. And I taped this yesterday at my house while the sun was shining. So we're gonna flip to that tape right quick. So I have all my supplies here. We're going to imagine that this bowl here is a lake, a miniature lake, and I'm going to pour water in my lake. And whenever it rains, soil and leaves, grass clippings, lawn chemicals, all those sorts of things, maybe even chemicals from mining activities by humans, all of that washes in. So I'm putting couple drops of food color in there just to keep it interesting, and that sort of represents all that pollution that might wash into the lake. And then I'm going to cover it with a little bit of plastic. So this is my plastic wrap, and I go to the back and to the front, and as you can tell at this point it is very sunny outside. And I have increasingly green water inside my lake, and we're gonna come back and check with this. But in the meantime, I want you to be thinking about what will happen. Actually, it's happening right now. It's a sunny day, and the top of this, maybe you can see this, is starting to get kind of cloudy. Let's watch that for a second. So the question is, what's going on and what is happening in nature that is kind of like this? Why is that getting cloudy? I'm going to bring this a little closer. What do you see? Well, we'll let it go a little bit longer. So we have set up our experiment. We're going to come back to it at the end and see what happens with that plastic and everything. But let's think about plants. This leaf is pretty stiff, but have you ever seen a plant that's wilted? What's going on with that? Well, I have a little demo. Inside plants are cells, and all living things are made out of cells. In the plant's case, the cells have something inside them that's kind of like a water balloon. And you all know, you've probably all filled up a water balloon. I've got a glove here that's like a balloon, and when there's nothing in it, it's pretty limp. It's like the limp plant. So what I did was I took my glove and I filled it with green water, and this is my example of a plant. So it's got little pretend leaves on the end of it, and right now it's very, very limp. How does that become stiff again? Well, the roots underground have to suck up the water from the soil, and if they're doing their job, if they can get the water, then that plant becomes stiff again. When I squeeze it, it increases the pressure in the glove, and those little finger stems stand up. But plants have to do something else too. Where those leaves are, they need to photosynthesize, and to photosynthesize, they need carbon dioxide. So the leaf breathes for the plant. And just like us, if we take in a breath and let it go, moisture from our lungs goes out with that breath. In the case of the plants, when the leaves breathe, they have little openings called stomata. And the stomata need to be open for the plant to be able to photosynthesize. But every time the stomata is open, water escapes too. And if too much water escapes, the plant wilts. And the roots have to work like crazy and get a whole lot more water and pump it back up again. And what plants do is kind of amazing. In times of the day when it's really, really hot, say over 85 degrees, they will usually shut those stomata to keep from losing too much water. But they can't stay shut all the time, or they won't be able to grow because they can't photosynthesize. So a plant like this always has to balance the need for water and the need for carbon dioxide, the availability of water, whether the soil is moist or not, with the temperatures and everything else. So this is my little pretend plant. Knowing the plants need water, gardeners can do some things to help. I'm gonna get up here a second. For one thing, we can add water. I've got our little Brussels sprout plant here, and in the garden we use these water jugs so that kids can carry it easily. And a lot of times when people first start watering, they'll just do this because they see the plant. But let's think about things a second. What part of the plant is absorbing that water? Is there a better way to give this plant some water to help it? Well, down underground here are where the roots are. So if I water down here, then I'm watering exactly where the plant can absorb it. And that's a good thing, because if the sun comes out, the little drops of water that would have landed here can actually concentrate that light like a magnifying lens. And on a tender leaf like lettuce, it's not so much a problem with this one, but on a tender leaf, it actually can burn that leaf in that spot. So also, the other thing we can do when we water is not water all at once, let it soak in, and come back and give it a little more. So that's one thing we can do. And I'm going to show you another trick. Over here where we have our squashes, we put a straw down. Now the straw, we'll come back and we'll make this a little thicker. The straw does a couple of things. It does help keep the weeds out, but even more importantly, probably, it shades the ground and it shades the roots. So when it rains, when the water goes on here, down under the straw, it stays a steady temperature and it's kind of uniformly, evenly moist. When the sun comes out and it's really hot, the shade helps keep the moisture in the soil. And for the plants, that's an important thing. If they don't have enough water for the roots to suck up, those roots can actually die. And if they get a whole lot of water one day and no water for a week, and then a whole bunch and not any, if it's very uneven like that, the flowers tend to fall off. They tend not to get fertilized. In the case of tomatoes, the skin is kind of thick, and if it's been really dry, the tomato is like this. And then when it rains, the plant sucks up the water and the fruit grows really quickly, kind of like that water balloon effect, and the skin will split. And then bacteria get in and you can't eat it. So even soil moisture is really helpful, and the straw is one way that we can help do it. Now plants have some other adaptations too. This one has a lot of fuzz down under here. So when it's photosynthesizing, those stomata are on the underside and they are protected by those hairs. It helps keep the moisture in and increase the humidity. So plants will do that. There's another one here that is very waxy, and that's another adaptation that plants may have. That's a bit of purslane if you want to eat that when you're out here weeding. So for plants, it's really, really important to have regular water, to have that branch is bad. So for plants, it's really important to have water on a regular basis, to have the soil be evenly moist, and to have sunshine so they can photosynthesize, but to have enough water for their roots. So that balancing act is important. We're going to go back to the experiment. Let's see what happened to that bowl and that plastic. Okay, I have come back to my imaginary lake with its green water, and let's see what's happened. If we look at this carefully, what was cloudy is now kind of speckled with water. And the question is, where did those water drops come from? Did they come from the air out here, or did they come from the water inside? Well, watch what happens if I touch the top. It's very dry. If I lift it up here, my finger's wet. So the water's definitely come from the inside. So if this were a real lake, we could say that that water on the plastic came from the lake. And how did it do that? Well, I'll give you one clue. It's a very hot day and the sun is working hard overhead. And the sun warmed up that water in our little pretend lake, and it gave that water extra energy. And when that happens, it can evaporate. And what that means is that individual water molecules from down here went into the airspace in between and landed there. And it was a little cooler here. So it was able to come out of the air and condense on that surface. In nature, that happens when water evaporates from ponds and lakes and goes up to the clouds and condenses. Then if that water comes back out of the clouds and drips down, we call that rain or precipitation, and then it fills the lake back up. That's actually the water cycle. So we have created a little miniature water cycle inside this bowl with the plastic to represent the cooler atmosphere up above. Now something else interesting happened. If you were guessing that the green water was going to evaporate and land up there, would you expect that water that landed and condensed, would you expect that to be green or clear? Let's take a peek. Here it is. Can you tell? It is quite clear. And that's one of the most amazing things about the water cycle. Even though I put pollution in there, pretend pollution, the food coloring, and the lake is polluted, when that water came up and it landed up here in our atmosphere and created this cloud, it was pure. So the water cycle actually helps clean our water. And that's a super cool and super important function, because the water that we see, I'm going to pull the camera back up to my backyard here. The water that we see on the ground around us, in the marshes and the rivers and the lakes, in the clouds, that is all the water we've got. Some of it soaks into the ground where you can't see it, but there's a limited amount. And the water we use today is the same water that was used yesterday and 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago and millions of years ago by the dinosaurs. If we didn't have a way to clean it, we wouldn't be able to drink it. So nature is the master recycler. It recycles the water, it cleans the water for the animals, for the birds, for the plants, and for us. Today's story comes from Persia. It's a land, today we would call it Iran, that's much drier than Minnesota. And Dan's going to be reading the story.
Our book today is called A Gift for the King, a Persian tale retold and illustrated by Christopher Manson. This story is about a king, King Artaxerxes, who ruled a great, vast empire. Oh, he was very rich, and he had many servants and brave soldiers who obeyed his every order. He lived in a marvelous colored palace filled with beautiful things. Well, it was the law of the land that all who came to visit the king were required to bring him a gift. Over the years, the king had received so many wonderful presents. Every day, people from all different lands of the empire brought King Artaxerxes beautiful and costly things, and you can see his palace is just full. Oh, but the day came when the king took no pleasure in all this. What? So King Artaxerxes jumped up and without a word went walking, not knowing where he was going. Well, he walked through his beautiful colored palace, through the carved and painted halls and shiny courtyards, and out the door. The king had never walked this far before. Well, he was always carried by servants or driven along in one of his gilded chariots. Everyone was astonished. The king's attendants hurried after him, wondering where was he going. Outside the palace, King Artaxerxes met two merchants, and they said, Oh, great king, may you live 100 years. We have gifts for you, rare incense and sweet perfumes from all over the world. And they showed the king what they had brought to him, and each jar contained a rich, rare, and costly scent. The king shrugged his shoulders and said to his attendants, when we return, put the perfumes and incense with all the rest of my perfumes and incense. And they walked on. Beyond the palace gardens, King Artaxerxes met a nobleman who ordered his servants to display beautiful robes as the king walked by. Oh, great king, said the nobleman, may you live 1,000 years. I have brought you robes of fine wool and silk woven through with gold and silver threads. Please accept this gift from your most loyal subject. And the king signaled to his attendants to take up the present and said with a sigh, when we return to the palace, put the robes with all my other robes. And then he walked on. Out on the plains, King Artaxerxes walked by the tower where the royal stargazers lived. Well, they happened to look down, and when they saw the king, they ran out of the tower to greet him. "O great king," they said, "may you live 100,000 years. We have made a statue in your likeness that will show your strength and majesty for all time. We hope this present pleases you." And the king looked over the statue, glittering with silver and colored stones, and said to his attendants, "When we return to the palace, put this statue in the room with all my other statues." And then he walked on. Well, in the desert, King Artaxerxes met a caravan of traders from distant lands who threw themselves down before him and said, "Oh, great king, may you live 1,000,000 years. We have traveled for many weeks to bring you these strong camels loaded with rugs woven of the finest, softest wool to be found anywhere. We hope you will enjoy the gift." And you can imagine King Artaxerxes said, "When we get back to the palace, put these rugs in the room with all the other rugs." And then he walked on. For some reason, King Artaxerxes took no pleasure in all his presents. His faithful attendants said, "Oh, great king, you are surely the richest king who has ever lived. Your treasures are heaped high with gold and silver. Your palace is enriched with every precious gift to be found in the world. Just look at these jewels shining in the sun. What more could you want? I have never walked so far before. My throat is dry as a desert stone." The king thought for a moment and said, "I want a cool drink." His attendants looked through everything they had collected on this walk. And they looked and they looked and they looked. They searched in baskets and caskets and bags and bundles, and they looked in vases and vessels and the jugs and jars. And in desperation, they even looked over the camels and the carpets and the coins and the coffers. But there was nothing for the king to drink. "Where is my drink?" demanded the king. His attendants threw themselves down in the dust before him. Oh, great king," they said, "there is nothing to drink. The bottles are filled with perfume. The cups are filled with pearls." "By the great shining sun," cried the angry king, "I have never been so thirsty before." Well, just then, a shepherd boy happened to come along, and he said, "No, great king, I am just a shepherd. If I were back in the hills where I live, I would give you one of my fattest sheep and the sweetest milk of my flock. But here I have only this old water jar. I hope you will like it." King Artaxerxes lifted up the old jar, which was cool to the touch. The sound of water splashing inside was the sweetest music he had ever heard. He poured some water into a bowl where it glistened and glittered like 1,000 diamonds. He lifted the bowl of precious liquid to his lips and took a deep, deep drink. The king had never tasted anything so good. The jar of water pleased the king more than any gift he had been given all that day. He was so pleased that he gave the horses, the chariot, and the camels to the ambassador and told him to ride home with the singing ladies. Then the king turned to the boy and said, "Because your gift has pleased me so much, I give you all these gifts in exchange." And And so it was done. Then King Artaxerxes, ruler of a rich and powerful empire, walked happily home, carrying his favorite gift. When the king arrived at his palace, he was so happy, no one knew what had happened. They all thought the old jar must be full of something unbelievably precious. And of course, they were right. And this is the end of this story.
I think I can identify with the king in this story. When you're thirsty, there's nothing better than a bit of nice, cold, clean water. Who knew there was so much to know about water, how it moves through the atmosphere, what it does to the plants, what it does to us. However, we are thankful for water, for rain, for sunshine, for the water cycle, and for each other, and for all the plants that grow with us. Let's extinguish our flame. We extinguish this flame, but we know that the light of truth and the warmth of love go with us in our heart. Have a wonderful week, folks.